Should we give a quick introduction, Mitch, and hopefully a couple of latecomers will come in as we're doing that and won't miss the main event. Do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Mitch. I'm head of revenue at Trustkeith, which means I look after everything before people become customers. So, a lot of my time is spent working with tech scale-ups, helping them figure out if what we do is the right fit. That's not the purpose of today. The purpose of today is to talk about what a good privacy notice looks like. Just a couple of notes. So this session is being recorded. So please take note of that. We will share the replays after. And if you've got questions, please feel free to chime in at any time. But we will also have a chance for questions at the end for Tom. On that note, Tom, over to you for an intro.
Yeah, cool. So I'm Tom. I'm head of delivery at Trustkeith. So if Mitch has decided that a company is a good fit and they come and start working with us, basically my team takes over from there. So yeah, responsible for kind of what we do, how we do it. But obviously today here to talk through all the stuff about privacy notices. So yeah, let's kick off. We've had a couple more join, which is great to see. Thanks for coming. Let's kick off. Just a very quick reminder, I've sent invites out to people to come up on this virtual stage. You're more than welcome to, but you're also more than welcome not to. Stick to the chat if you're more comfortable with that. So today, we're going to cover these 5 things. So we're going to start off with a quick important note. We're going to talk about what does the law say? What is a privacy notice? I'm going to show you what not to write. I'm going to give you an example of that. And I'm going to give you some examples of good privacy notices. And I'm testing out embedding videos into these, so fingers crossed that actually works. And also we're going to talk about how to actually write one properly. So there's a few things we're going through. Any point, feel free to use the chat, ask questions as we go through. If it's a good time to answer them during the presentation, we'll stop and answer your question. If not, don't worry, Mitch will be taking note of anything, and we'll be going through them at the end. And likewise, for any of you that have submitted questions beforehand, we will go through those at the end. So the important note is just to be very clear about today. We're talking about the how today. There's a lot of what needs to be included in the privacy notice, and there are lots of checklists and stuff like that out there, and people are quite good at getting that right. But what they're very bad about is how they actually do it, and that is what we are specifically talking about today. So it's just an important thing to bear in mind that we're thinking about how do you write a good privacy notice? How do you write one that's not awful? You can take any tick box of things that are meant to be included in there, but how do you actually make one that is compliant and not a waste of time? The law on privacy notices is not quite as clear cut as it may seem. Individuals under the GDPR, Data Protection Act as well, they have the right to be informed about the collection and use of their personal data. So that includes letting them know about things like why you're processing their personal data. What's your purpose for this? How long are you keeping that data for? Who are you sharing it with? That kind of information. Often the easiest way to comply with this obligation is to put the relevant information on your website as a privacy notice. I say that, and I think this is an important one. There's no obligation that this is something that sits on your website. In practice, it's 99.9% of the times the most practical way to do it. But it's important to note what the law says. The law says you have to inform people about what you're doing with their data. It doesn't tell you how you have to inform them quite as explicitly as saying it must be an accessible link on your website. So it's important to note that. And generally speaking, that is the easiest way to do it. But there are things that we can do with video and cartoons for children and things like that as examples that might be equally as beneficial rather than just a wall of text on the website. And this is why it's really important to note it's not a contract and it's not the same as terms and conditions. You can't sign up to a privacy notice. So, you get those websites with a tick box that say, confirm that I agree with the privacy notice. Agree or not, it doesn't matter. It's a notice. It's telling you exactly what's happening. If you disagree with it, well, you can't disagree with it. It's just factual. It's like disagreeing with me saying the sky is blue. This is what's happening. The sky is blue. I disagree. Okay, I'm sorry about that, but there's not really much I can do about it. That's a privacy notice. Terms and conditions, for example, are things that you could potentially disagree with. They're terms of service, and they're really there to protect the business. So there's a very different mentality that goes into a writing terms and conditions. Writing a privacy notice, you're literally informing people what is happening when they give you their personal data. It's as simple as that. There's no contract to sign. There's no agreement. There's nothing like that. So the idea that this is some kind of legal formal contract is unfortunately quite prevalent, but it's not. It's not a legal contract. And so one of the mistakes we can do with a privacy notice is to treat it as such and give it to quite an expensive lawyer and end up with something that looks a bit like this. And I'm just going to caveat, we've all seen it. It's everywhere. This is a real privacy notice that I've pulled off the internet. I have changed the name of the company as not to embarrass anyone. But this is a classic. We've all seen this. Who we are so-and-so limited, a limited company in England and Wales under blah, 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 blah. Company, we, us, or our. We value the privacy of individuals or collectively our services. And I mean, come on, like, no one wants to read that. I mean, what does it even mean? I mean, as if people are genuinely confused when we say we. You know, we are going to process your personal data in such a way. I mean, people are not confused by this. This is not a contract. This doesn't need this level of detail and this level of wordiness. What you've created here is not a privacy notice. If your privacy notice reads like this, it's not a privacy notice. And the reason being is something we're going to cover later. What makes a good privacy notice? What makes a compliant privacy notice is that people have to understand it. No one can understand it. Well, it's not a privacy notice. As much as someone might tell you that it is, it isn't. If the average person that's going to interact with this cannot understand it, it's not a privacy notice. And most people cannot comprehend this level of technical legal writing. There is a reason we talk about reading age and stuff like that and kind of aim for kind of Harry Potter level reading for the general population. Most people, this takes an advanced level of English to be able to digest. You know, by using our service use to collection, use disclosure and procedures and things like that. These are not for a lot of us in the startup world, these words might not seem complex or difficult, but we have to remember that we're writing this so that the average person can understand this. And that's not to be patronizing to people. Study after study has shown that we need to write in much simpler English for people to understand it. And this is just too high a level of English. And so you've not created a privacy notice. I argue that you've created an expensive wall of text on your website. So let's look at some examples of what alternatives might look like. Let's talk about what goes into a good privacy notice. So as I said, there are certain things that you have to have in place for it to be a compliant privacy notice and thus be good. One of them is it has to be concise, has to be transparent, has to be intelligible, easily accessible, and in clear and plain language. And that means, yes, your privacy notice must be appropriate for your audience. Just breaking those things down very quickly. Concise means cut out all the stuff that's not relevant. There's lots of things. There's lots of privacy notices where we get elaborate descriptions of your security procedures. I don't care about your security procedures. I want to know what's happening with my personal data. Or elaborate kind of, we really care about your privacy and here's all the things about our company that make us wonderful. You can cut that out. Keep it concise, to the point, and make it so that people don't have to spend 10 minutes reading what they could read in 1 minute. So that's making it concise. Making it transparent means you have to be transparent what you're doing with personal data. You have to follow the things that you're expected to say, and that's what I'm talking about. The kind of the what that goes into a privacy notice has to be there. So you have to let people know what you're doing with personal data. You have to let them know about what lawful basis you're relying on. You have to let them know who you're sharing the data with, etc., etc. You have to be transparent, but it doesn't have to be long and wordy and complex. Key one there, it has to be intelligible. That's pretty straightforward. And again, like we were saying, that one before, we, us, them, etc., kind of legal language is not necessarily that intelligible to the average audience. Easily accessible, pretty straightforward. It has to be accessible easily. So for a lot of people, that is a footer. You know, it's constantly in the footer of the website. There's an example of making it easily accessible. You know, somewhere that people don't have to ask for it. You know, people should just be able to find it easily without having to ask for it. And in clear and plain language. It has to be in clear and plain language. This isn't a criteria that I've made up. This is what the law says. So we have to move away from the idea that privacy notices are these complex legal documents when the law literally says something very different. So there's a few things you can ask yourself. First one is, can I understand it? If you pass this out to someone externally and they come and write you a complex privacy notice, first question is, do I understand it? If I were using this service, would I understand exactly what's happening with my personal data? And that's the first question to ask. Second thing is, would the average person understand it? So thinking then a layer of kind of what is the common denominator here? What is something that most people would be able to understand? So that's something around kind of, like I said, the kind of Harry Potter reading age kind of score that you'd be looking at there. So pretty simple, pretty plain language. And then another thing to ask yourself is, do I need something simpler, easier? So for example, for children, so some examples of this might be, like I said, previous notices that use cartoons or are much shorter and simpler version for children, because we're working with children. They have to understand what we're doing with their data. How do we make that simple? So cartoons, videos, those kind of things. Could we make something simpler that is easier to understand without compromising on being transparent? And that's the balance that you have to strike. So those are some examples of questions you can ask. What I'm going to show you now, hopefully, is some videos, examples of privacy notices that I've had a look at. Now, I'm going to be very clear, not all of these, particularly the first two, I would argue are perfect. I think there are problems with them. But what we're really, as I said today, thinking about the how of writing them. This is a very famous privacy notice, if there is such a thing as a famous privacy notice, by Juro. Everyone's heard of this. Look at how they're structured, how and when we collect our data. They've made it very simple, a nice flow chart. They're very clear about what they identify. I mean, the UI, the UX of this is very attractive. Their lawful bases are very easily defined here. It's very easy to read. And they've also got a few things around kind of expanding these sections so that you can read more if you want to read more. And if you don't want to read more, you can just move on with your life. So all of these kind of expand. They've got this interesting UI. I think it's quite long. I think there's a lot of information here that potentially could be stripped down a bit. It's not as concise as maybe I would want it to be. But it's very clear. It's very easy to understand. It's in very plain English. I mean, and the detail's there if you want it. If you really want it, the detail is there. So this is an example of potentially making it seem concise and easy to digest without making it tremendously long for the average user. You only need to engage with it if you want to. So that's an example of a privacy notice with an interesting UI. This one I'm going to show you now is very interesting. You'll recognize the brand. I haven't tried to hide the brand, but I'm not necessarily endorsing one brand over another. But here is an interesting example of a pretty unusual way of doing a privacy notice, and I'm going to play this. Hopefully you are going to hear the sound. If you can't hear the sound, maybe Mitch, you can give me a shout. If you can't hear the sound, then you're just going to have to imagine that there's sound. But in a second, there will be, when I click watch video.
Know your style? Need help finding it? We want to know what makes you, you. Your likes, buys, style, and size are clocked and logged to bring you inspiration and looks you'll love. You decide or change your mind with no spam from us, only the good stuff. You can tick it or unpick it. You can let us know what we should keep and delete. Anything you tell us, we keep locked. Your privacy is our priority. We collect information about you. We protect information about you. We use it to help you find you. If you're in, it's a win-win.
So people ask me, well, how can a privacy notice help me stand out? I mean, this is a pretty standout privacy notice. For a consumer that's interacting with this business, this is a very interesting way to do privacy. You see, they've simplified it into its basics. Then again, there is that full privacy notice. If you want it, the information is there. And it's broken down very clearly in very plain language. What we do, why we do it, and why we need to do it, the legal stuff. And if you want, you can go ahead and read this. It's in very plain language. And it will be pretty straightforward for anyone to understand, I would argue. Again, there's a ton of detail in here, and I think potentially it could be a lot more concise. There might be some simpler ways of presenting some of this. I'm not necessarily making a judgment as to whether they're compliant or not. As I said, I'm more thinking about some of the different ways of doing things. So as you can see, this is quite quite an interesting privacy notice. And from a brand perspective, it really stands out to me. This is something that is a market differentiator, and it's certainly something that has come up in conversations I've had with other companies that have referenced this privacy notice. So it is something that is known. So that's an interesting way of doing privacy notice. And finally, one more. This is our one. Trust Keith's privacy notice. We have again kind of chosen the layered option. So if you want to find out what's happening, for example, if you sign up to one of these events like today, you can find out exactly what's happening through a layered system. You can find out as much or as little as you want to from there. So there we go, an example of that kind of simple layering system that we have. And also additionally, the one thing I think I have that we have at Trust Keith, is yeah, it's that long. That's it. It's very concise. That is all you see when you first log onto it. So again, that's an example of how to do a privacy notice a little bit differently. So with that in mind, let's cover kind of how do we go about pulling together how do we go about pulling together a decent privacy notice? How do we write it properly? Because another myth that I think is important to dispel. So the first one is about it's this complex legal thing. The second is that we can just go and write one. Fortunately, you can't. If you want to do it properly, you can't just go and write it. There's a few things we need to do beforehand in order to make sure that we've got a privacy notice that is going to stand up to scrutiny. One of those is mapping out your data. Map out what you process, what you collect, how you collect it, where you store it, who you share it with, all of those questions that we're trying to establish so that we can potentially write a privacy notice. An example of a data map might be something like this. It looks far more complex than it is. I can promise you that. What effectively this is doing, the different colors are, the green is a kind of what personal data there is. The blue is what systems it's going to. This breaks down pretty much the user journey, where things are going, into a really digestible format. If you zoom in, which I can't because it's a PowerPoint presentation, if we zoom into this, you'll see it's a lot simpler than it looks. And this is just breaking down how does the data flow through the business. And that gives us the information we need in order to write a privacy notice or anything like that. So we've got that stuff for how you collect it. The reason I suggest that is much easier to do this by looking at the journey. Thinking about that first communication with the data subject. How do they contact you? What data to collect? Where does that go? That's how you're going to get a good overview from it. And then that gives you an opportunity to tick another legal box that you have to do. You have to have records of processing activities. It's a legal requirement under Article 30 of the GDPR, something you have to have, and a lot of companies don't. Very useful document. If you do this right, you've got the data mapping, it translates into a records of processing. You're going to find that records of processing very useful because a records of processing document answers a lot of questions that you have. Can I delete this data? Yes or no? What's the legal basis that we're processing it for? How long do I retain this document? That's what a good records of processing will tell you the answers to. So you do that at the same time. And basically the journey looks a bit like this. You go from a data map, translate that into a records of processing document, and that is going to allow you to really easily write a privacy notice. And because you've broken all of that information down, and effectively all the records of processing, all the privacy notice is a public facing version of your records of processing activities. So that would be my suggested steps to go about it. So again, remember the key takeaways from this are those criteria: concise, transparent, intelligible, easily accessible, clear and plain language. Always remember those things. Very important to get those things right. Second is, it is not a contract. It is not a legal document. Do not waste your money or your time writing something overly complex and overly difficult. It is not a good use of either money or time, and no one's going to understand it. And the second thing is, don't just go and try and write it. It will be very difficult. It's very difficult, I think, to conceptually go from a business straight to privacy notice. Take some steps beforehand to make sure that you're getting it right. And that is how you're going to write a good privacy notice. That was 20 minutes or so, designed to keep it pretty short, pretty snappy. There's a ton more that we could go into, but I don't want to talk at you for the entire hour. I want to kind of open this up to questions and conversations as well. So on that note, Mitch, anything come through or any questions you wanted to raise?
Yes, there are a few questions that have come through. First of all, just one from me. How do you go about doing the data mapping? And how do you keep it up to date?
Yeah. How do you go about doing it? How do I go about doing it? I would normally sit down with a leader in each function and just ask them, what personal data do you process? How does it come to you? Where does it go? Some very simple questions to get them to do that. And each function will have their own kind of knowledge of what's going on in their area. And afterwards, once I've got all of that, I'll just pull it together. So there'll be a couple of repetitions here and there. For example, if you've got a separate sales and marketing team, for example, there'll be a decent amount of repetition there. So putting it all together, making sure it all makes sense, and reviewing that with someone who's got a good overview in the business. That might be a head of ops or something. And then that's your data maps. How you keep it up to date, that comes, I think, with building in decent process in your business around the processing of personal data. So really, anytime anything new is happening with personal data or anything's changing, someone should know about this. And that comes from having a decent process that backs it up. I wouldn't recommend necessarily updating your data maps every single time you make a small change. I would want to get into a cadence of review. And that might be every few months. Depends how quickly you're making changes. If you're making changes all the time, that might be every 2-3 months. If you've got one product and you're pretty static in what you do and you're just expanding on that, it might be once every 6 months, once a year. But remember, your privacy notice has to be transparent. So if you're doing new things with personal data, you have to let people know.
Okay, nice. Thanks, Tom. The next one is, we've spoken a lot about the how. What about the why? Like, why is it important to get a privacy notice right from your perspective?
Yeah, great question. 2 reasons, I would say. Well, I guess there's 2 perspectives on it. First, if you're B2C, like we've discussed, there is a chance to stand out a bit. There is a chance to provide a consistent brand experience. I think if you're particularly interested in your brand and how you come across publicly, you're going to take that very seriously, and likewise you should. It's also about building trust and confidence. Showing you put some effort and time into this is very good at building that trust and confidence that people have. Whether we like it or not, if you get an article, for example, on the BBC now about GDPR, they don't explain what the GDPR is because everyone knows. It's become more and more of a thing that people are aware of and consumers are aware of. And privacy is, particularly in the US, strangely enough, they don't have many laws about it, but the Americans in general, from my experience, care a lot about their privacy. And so you do find that there is a bit of consumer pressure on there. I think the second one is external pressure. So whether that be, enterprise business, this is the first impression that people are going to get of your company. If they're looking into you from a privacy perspective, if they see that you have just copied and pasted a template from someone else and just not put any effort into it, that's a bad first impression. It doesn't look very good. And also, I think it's worth noting that we do see investors as well starting to take data protection very seriously, particularly the further down the series you go, and they will always scrutinize a privacy notice. So showing you've put that effort into it and that time into it is a really good starting point for it.
Nice. Thanks, Tom.
One very quick thing.
Go on.
I tend to talk about the practical. It's just the right thing to do. It's the law. It's like paying your taxes. There's also an element of it. It's the right thing to do, and so there is an ethical section to this as well, which I'll leave to individual companies to decide about. Obviously, where they stand on that issue, but it is the law. It is the right thing to do, and you have a duty to treat customers and things like that as the adults that they are, and be open and transparent about what you're doing with them. And frankly, if you're not comfortable doing that, you will want to question your practices, I think, in general. If one of my kind of top tips in data protection is always to ask yourself, would I be happy explaining this process to someone externally? like a member of the public or one of our customers or one of our investors or something like that, if the answer is no, then you should probably have a think about that, that in and of itself. So, yeah.
Nice. Okay, I've got a good question here. Why do you think tech scale-ups get privacy notices so wrong?
Ooh, do you want my controversial answer or my non-controversial?
Always controversial.
Who's on the call? No, I'm kidding. All right. One, I think that lots of companies have been sold the lie that it's really complex, really difficult. Only super specialist people can do it. And so I think that there is an industry out there that have perpetuated that lie. And part of our mission in data protection is to break with some of these notions. I think it's been in some people's commercial interests to keep up the illusion that this is a really complex, difficult legal document. Let's put it that way. So I think there's that. I think the second one is people just don't know how to approach it. And so what they do is they look at everyone else, and everyone else's informs their decision. If everyone else's is terrible, yours is going to be terrible, unfortunately, if that's the path that you're taking. And I think there's a big element of that in it as well. And secondly, thirdly, I guess, lots of companies, to be frank, there are companies that just don't care. And if you're copying it from their website, well, you're not getting off from a good starting point. So I think there's elements of that involved. But I think that I do think the key reason is that there's been this kind of that some people have had commercial interests to keep this as a bit of a gated thing. Oh, you can only go to a lawyer to get it done. Yeah. I mean, it's nonsense. It's not true. But it's certainly in certain people's commercial interests. So I think there is a huge element of that in it, to be honest.
Nice. Well, on that note, so we often see fast-growing scale-ups go to their lawyers or even IT consultants to help with data protection, but is it really a legal or even a technical issue?
So it's not legal, and it's not technical, but it's not a legal problem or a technical problem. Let's put it that way. There are technical and legal elements to it. Fundamentally, it's a cultural problem. We actually see the most successful people that are able to drive change in the data protection space in a business that we work with are people who work in ops, rather than a CTO or a legal officer. We actually find that it tends to be kind of head of ops, chief operating officer. They tend to be a lot more successful in making this work, and that's because at its core, it's a cultural issue, it's an understanding issue, it's an education issue. There's no denying that data protection is a law, and there will be kind of opinions on it. There'll be certain areas of it. There are certain contracts that you're required that, yeah, you might need to involve a lawyer in, but they cannot solve data protection for you on their own. You know, it's not something that you can just hand over to a lawyer and they solve data protection for you, because it won't change how your organization works. And also, likewise, from a technical perspective, all that data is encrypted, so why should we care? It's like, it's so much broader than that. That's an element of it. And yes, encryption might be a good option for certain data and for certain reasons, but actually how you came to that consideration and the things that underpin that are more important. And if you don't have those in place, you're never going to succeed. So it's pretty much a cultural, operational issue that you bring in other stakeholders too. So you bring in your legal stakeholder, you bring in your technical stakeholder, but you're not going to achieve it purely by focusing on just one of those areas. You need to approach it from a cultural perspective. And that's the thing. I would argue it's a cultural problem with a cultural solution.
Interesting. Nice. Okay, thank you. Next question. I have to mention the B word because of this one. What direction is data protection going in the UK post-Brexit?
Just get my crystal ball. We don't know. So there's been announcements and then not announcements, then announcements, not announcement, consultation. Law's gone to Parliament. Law went through its first reading. Law's been dropped. What that means, we don't know. So the UK is looking to change the law by, they did write one, and it did go through first reading in the Houses of Parliament, the House of Commons, in the UK. Which, for anyone, I don't know if everyone here is from the UK, that's the lower house. So it's the first stage. of the readings. That law is very similar to the GDPR and just has a different name. I can't remember exactly what it's called off the top of my head, but there are certain things like it says, oh, you know, we're getting rid of the records of processing activities document, but we're replacing it with a list of all the processing that you do, which I would say is exactly the same thing with a different name. We're getting rid of the role of DPO, but we're replacing it with senior privacy officer, which is just the same role, but just with a different name. So there is an element of politics in the decision to change the law. GDPR is a EU law. It's EU red tape, etc. There will be a political mandate, I think, from the current ruling party to change the law, so that they can say we changed the law. On a practical level, I don't think it's going to differ that much from the GDPR. Unfortunately, however, it does mean that there'll just be another thing to think about. I think right now where we're pretty lucky from a pure business perspective is that we only need to think about one law if we're operating in the UK and the EU. We will now need to think about two. If you're in a US company serving the UK and the EU, for example, you're now going to have to think about three. So I think that there's an element of it will complicate things a little bit, but not to the extent that I think it's going to be catastrophic. It's not going to be as seismic as GDPR. The changes, there's going to be pretty small cosmetic changes here and there from the looks of the bill so far. Gone through its first reading. It's been quietly dropped from Parliament. It will probably be changed. Everything that goes through Parliament gets changed multiple times before we get the final version. So it's very hard to say the definitive answer to that. But certainly the law will change. There will be some hiccups to get over. But I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as, say, we're getting rid of data protection in the UK, for example.
Nice. The sweet irony that there's a bit of a lack of clarity around what's happening with GDPR.
Well, yeah, new prime minister, new cabinet, new monarch, all in the same week. Probably has put a lot of things on the back burner, and I just don't think it's a priority for the government at the moment.
Nice. Okay, so that's all the questions that were submitted. I've got one question to add on the cultural piece. How do you facilitate cultural change in a fast-growing tech scale-up when it comes to data protection?
How long we got left? I'd say, okay, we're thinking specifically about data protection. To be honest, I think anyone here who's experienced with change and stuff, it's pretty similar to a normal change management process, and you should think of it as a change management process. I think that there are some key building blocks with data protection that people get wrong. Let's put it that way, and maybe I'll focus on those because it'll be easier. I think it's a change management piece, but don't make these mistakes, which is giving people really dense policies to read. For example, yes, policies are necessary. I work in the field. I will argue for policies. Absolutely. But don't give someone a 25-page policy that's like a customer service assistant. I used to be a customer services assistant when I first started my career. I was not interested in a 25-page policy. I probably didn't read it back then, to be honest. I don't remember any of them. None of them stuck in my mind. They're important. They might have a role, but do think about how you engage with people. So that might be, do we have a simplified version of this? Do we have a procedure that supports this? So, for example, we might have a complex breach policy. If I have a breach, I want to know what to do. I don't want a 25-page policy. I want to know exactly what to do because I'm probably panicking. I'm probably a little bit worried. And so how do we provide that? Where's that coming from? Also think about training. Training is a critical element in any kind of change program. Again, a lot of mistakes that we see, people bring in training first. Let's train everyone and then let's roll stuff out. If you train people and then roll things out, by the time they get to rolling out, they've forgotten the training and it's lost its impact and they're having to be retrained. If you roll things out, then train people, they've got something to go to. They can go and start doing it. It's so much easier. It's just so much more sensible. So training, very important, but don't rush into training until you know actually what it means for your business. I guess I would see it as a kind of section of building blocks, policies, Make sure you've got procedures to support those policies. Make sure they're easy to understand, a bit like your privacy notice should be easy to understand. Make sure you train people on these things, and that you train them once you know what they mean and what they mean for the business and what the impact will be. And yeah, I think aside from that, I mean, driving cultural change in a business. I'm going to plug one of our events. We're going to have one of those. We're going to have a whole event dedicated to cultural change in a business. I think. I hope I've not got that wrong, because I put you in hot water if I have, because you organize our events. But that's worthy of a whole talk, and definitely worth us coming back to. But it's right to view data protection and putting in place the right things as a cultural piece, as a change management piece, rather than let's just get some policies and cross our fingers.
Nice. Yes, I believe there is an event on cultural change. I can confirm when that is after the event, after today's event.
If there isn't, there is now.
Yeah. Maybe there should be. Okay, then final question is, like, data protection is a huge topic, and there are so many different strands of it. Let's say I'm in a tech scale up. I've been made responsible for data protection.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I start? Like, what are the essentials that I should be focused on to start with?
Crack open the champagne. You've been given a
celebrate.
Celebrate. Actually, the stuff we've spoken about today. Start with just making sure you understand what data. What's the data? What's the personal data we're processing? Why are we processing? You know, the stuff we were talking about in terms of like, how do you write a good privacy notice? That data mapping exercise and stuff like that. Make sure you understand the personal data. If you're responsible for personal data, I know it might sound a bit facetious, a bit obvious, but start with the personal data. That's where you got to start. Understand what it is, what you're doing with it, where you're sharing it, and that kind of thing. That's going to give you an insight into where the risk is, what are the things to focus on. Almost inevitably, your next steps are going to be making sure that you've got senior buy-in for this. You know, that's a real key thing that has to be an organizational priority, and that you've got support. You've got stakeholders that you're able to rely on to get things done. And that's why the senior accountability is so important. Yeah. I think the next thing to do is start focusing on what do you legally need. So that's going to be things like your privacy notice, your records of processing activities, retention schedule, DPIAs, LIAs. If you don't know what those are, don't worry. That's a whole other topic, but feel free to Google. They're effectively risk assessments for data protection. You might need to do them in certain cases. If anyone does want to know what they are, just drop a question in the chat. But those are kind of legal requirements. And then thinking about breaches, incidents, and those sorts of things. That's your starting point. You've got the buy-in, you've got the stakeholders involved, you've got the legal basics that you need to have in place, and you've got a fail-safe for if things go wrong. Once you've got the handle on those things, then you can start thinking about maturing your data protection position, I would say.
Nice. Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions? I know there's other people here. Feel free to add something in the chat. Rachel, feel free to unmute and ask if you've got anything. It says here that Rachel's typing.
Nice.
But I'm also think that it said that for a little while, so I don't know if that is actually true on my side or not. Yeah, I mean, look, you know, I guess final call for any questions. I'll give people a minute to have a think or to type something in the chat. If you've got anything.
One final one I was asked on a call about 2 hours ago. Are there any certifications that validate GDPR compliance?
No.
Okay.
Simple. Simple answer. There is no such thing. There is scope for some in terms of the GDPR has an article. I can't remember what article. There's 99 of them. It has something in there. I think it's like Article 47 talks about scope for there to be a potential certification as things go forward. There are two that exist in the UK that are not certifying that you're GDPR compliant, but might certify that certain parts of what you do are compliant. I think it's particularly around the children's code. So there are a couple that the ICO regulates. They've approved a couple. They don't say, oh, we're GDPR compliant. They're really hyper specific about really specific issues. But in terms of like, no, and anyone who just two things to note. I've got a few people on the call and I've not looked at your websites or anything like this. This might not be true for you. Do not put the ICO's badge on your website or anything like that. A, it's a lie, but also B, it's a breach of copyright and people have been pulled up for it. So don't make that mistake. A lot of people do it. Oh, ICOs, we're GDPR compliant. You're breaching copyright. So just be very careful about that. You might get a strongly worded letter. But there is no kind of scheme that says, yes, we are GDPR compliant. And anyone who says that they are is stretching the truth. Let's put it that way.
Nice. Okay. That wraps up all of the questions that we received online.
Awesome.
And all questions I've got. So I think we can wrap up there.
Cool. Brilliant. Thanks everyone for coming. And for all those questions that came through. There was quite a lot this time.
Yeah.
Have good weeks, days until we see you again at our next event, which Mitch will be announcing soon.
Shortly. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.